Dan Caldwell is a Marine Corps veteran who wound up until 3 days ago advising the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, on military policy. He was one of the strongest voices in the U.S. government in the Trump administration against the war with Iran. And his rationale was simple. It's not in America's interest, and many Americans will die, and billions will be spent on a war we don't need to fight. And as someone who fought in Iraq, he was able to take that case to the principals with some force. Then, 3 days ago, he was fired from the Pentagon. But not for his views on Iran, no. Dan Caldwell was fired because, reporters are told off the record, he had leaked classified documents to the media. But what were these classified documents exactly? Well, no one at the Pentagon could know the answer to that because Dan Caldwell's phone was never examined, nor was he given a polygraph. So actually, beneath the headlines was nothing other than a false accusation. Was Dan Caldwell fired because he opposed the push to war with Iran? You decide. Here's Dan Caldwell. So there is an enormous amount of pressure on this administration to participate in military action against Iran. And the president's position has been, I think, really clear for a long time, which is we don't want Iran to get nuclear weapons. That's bad for everybody.
Yes.
He sincerely believes that. He's against proliferation. He's very concerned about nuclear weapons in general, I think. But we would strongly prefer a diplomatic solution. And he's being attacked up and down, including by a lot of people in the administration in private, and really who are trying to steer him toward military action. So leaving aside all the internecine fights going on, just as a real life matter, what would happen if the U.S. participated in a military strike on Iran's nuclear sites?
So I strongly believe that for diplomacy to work, there needs to be a credible military option.
Yes.
And the president needs that. The Pentagon, where I used to work, needs to provide that. That is their role in American foreign policy, is to provide that leverage for diplomatic solutions to work. Now,
Yes.
That's how it's supposed to work. Does it often work that way? Unfortunately, the last 30 years have shown us that it really doesn't. But the Trump administration is trying to make it work that way, like it's supposed to. So that's
okay, so we're pursuing diplomacy with the leverage of potential military action.
Correct. That is how it's supposed to work. Now, there's risks in that. You could create a security dilemma, a spiral. So you have to be careful, but that is essentially why the DoD exists. Now, with that said, there are obviously specifics I can't get into, but I think it is fair to say that a war with Iran risks being incredibly costly in terms of lives and dollars and instability in the Middle East.
Lives and dollars, American lives, American dollars.
The lives of Americans, the lives of Iraqis, of Saudis, of Bahrainians, of
Israelis.
Emiratis, yes, of Israelis, and of course Iranians. It could be an incredibly costly war. And I think that is very obvious to anybody who's been watching the region for a while. And I think that's why over the last few years, you have seen certain countries in the region change some of their positions on how they want to engage Iran. There are a lot of Gulf Arab countries, for example, who they by no means view Iran as a benevolent force in the region. They're very aware of the threats that they could pose, but they also recognize that a war for them would be extremely costly. And so they're trying to adopt a different posture. And that's a recognition on their end of the costs that a potential full-out war with Iran could have. And I think the president, vice president, they know this. And that is why they are making sure they're prioritizing diplomacy. And let me just say, thank God we have Steve Witkoff in the administration. He is truly doing the Lord's work and trying to stop this war through diplomacy and also end another ongoing war in Russia, Ukraine. And they're making sure that his effort is the main effort, not a military effort at the moment.
So just for people who haven't been following this, what you're alluding to with the Gulf states, there are 6 of them, but 2 of the biggest ones and the closest U.S. allies would be UAE and Saudi. And those are primarily Sunni states run by Sunnis, and they are hostile to Iran for a bunch of different reasons going back a long
Correct.
way. Iran's proxy forces in neighboring countries. There's a lot here, but they've been basically enemies of Iran or perceived that way. And so the thought was, well, they would back military action against Iran, but you're saying all of a sudden wake up and realize, no, they don't back it.
They don't want a major war in the Middle East right now because
Yes.
of what they're trying to do with their countries in terms of economic development,
Yes.
because they're trying to give their people a better life. It's worth noting that Khalid bin Salman, the Saudi defense minister, was in Tehran, I believe, a few days ago. And he's the brother of Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince.
Yes.
And they recognize fully the threat that Iran poses, and they take it seriously. But just like the Trump administration, they are prioritizing diplomatic outreach and trying to achieve somewhat of a détente. And that doesn't mean you disarm and you join hands and the Middle East becomes this, happy, hippie, circle jam band. It means that people recognize it's in no one's interest to have a major war in the Middle East.
So the idea that it could become a major war is kind of absent from American news accounts. So the idea is that the United States, probably in partnership with Israel, or vice versa, Israel in partnership with the United States, would take out the, I think, 6 Iranian nuclear sites, and that would kind of be the end of it. That it wouldn't become a major war. I mean, I don't think I've ever read any account that suggests it could become a major war, but you're saying it could.
Look, the minute that the bombs or bullets start flying, you can never say with certainty what exactly is going to happen.
Yeah.
But I think that because of the fact that Iran has been put on its back foot, and Iran is weakened, they've had a lot of failures in the region. I think that actually creates an opportunity for more and better diplomacy, but there's some who argue that creates an opportunity for more military action. And again, maybe that's true, but all indications is that any type of strike would likely incite a major war in the Middle East. And again, I won't get into specifics of what that could entail, but that is a likely outcome of any sustained set of strikes on certain parts of Iran.
I saw a graphic the other day that showed the number of U.S. military installations in that region around the Persian or Arabian Gulf. And I don't know if it was a complete list, but there are a lot. There are a lot. And there's publicly available information. There are a lot of American service personnel stationed in that region in different places. And some of the places, there aren't that many. They're not massive, well-defended bases. They seem like small bases, including in Iraq and Syria, but others. I mean, why wouldn't those people be at risk?
It's not even just the service members. It's diplomats in these large embassies in places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Kuwait. There are some places where there's actually family members in the Middle East. So it's not just service members that are at risk. It is American government employees, primarily diplomatic staff. It's also a lot of American workers in the region, working in the oil industry, working in the finance industry. There are a lot of Americans that would be at risk, not just service members. And that is, again, that is something that, as you point out very well, is often overlooked in any discussion around military action.
It's not even mentioned. It's not even mentioned. The threat to American lives is not even mentioned. And that's, of course, not even considering, the potential for terrorism. I mean, 9/11 happened because extremists disagreed with American foreign policy. I mean, they said so again and again and again and again. You're supposed to ignore that and think they did it because they hated our freedoms. What they did was evil. I'm, of course, not in any way excusing it, but they said why they did it. We disagree with what you're doing, and they attacked the U.S. homeland and killed 3,000 Americans. So, there's got to be a concern given how many Iranians came into the country under the Biden administration illegally, like that there are probably agents of the Iranian government here, and like there could be acts of terror here if we did this.
I mean, that is a risk with any overseas military operation. I do think this is another reason why we need to take Homeland Defense and Homeland Security more seriously. But yes, that is a real risk. I will say, the backing up to 9/11 comparison is there was a series of mistakes in both American foreign policy and American security policy that paved the road to 9/11. I mean, the inability of the FBI and CIA to work together, the decision through friendly nations to fund certain groups, to allow the growth of certain forces to fight communism, which at the time was probably the right decision because of the threat the Soviet Union posed. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And one of the reasons why we're in the situation we are in the Middle East with Iran is, we have to be honest, because of the war in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a check against Iran, is that he forced Iran to devote resources to deterring Iraq that now Iran doesn't need to put against deterring Iraq conventionally or through their own proxies. Now they're able to put that money into places like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and also devote more resources to its missile program and potentially its nuclear program as well too. That is, I think, one of the things that you can't overlook when discussing foreign policy, and that not enough people have the conversation about how did we get here. It's like people don't want to have a conversation about how we got to where we are in Ukraine. NATO expansion played a big role in that. 30 years of failed American foreign policy towards Eastern Europe, the support of certain revolutions, the support of certain political figures. There were smart people from George Kennan to even the former CIA director, whatever you think of him, Bill Burns, who warned that this stuff would happen. And again, these decisions that we make in a certain moment, very focused on one thing, have second and third order consequences that sometimes are very easy to see, that they're quite obvious. Like if anybody had any understanding of the region and the power dynamics in the region in 2003, they would have known, geez, removing Saddam Hussein, however awful he was, would inevitably benefit Iran. There was hardly any discussion of that in the lead up to the war.
Well, no, I was president of the country when all of that happened, and I didn't know anything, but it just seemed obvious if you have a majority Shiite country and you force democracy, whatever that is, on that country, and all of a sudden you get a Shiite government, it's probably going to be aligned with Iran, right? It went from a bulwark against Iran to an ally of Iran, which it remains, I think.
It is effectively, the Iraqi government is effectively an Iranian proxy.
Okay, so why would you do that? Was it, and this we're getting far afield, but it's directly relevant to what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Even I, as like a 35-year-old journalist, could see that this was going to have this effect. Why were the geniuses in charge of our policy not thinking that? Or maybe they were. Maybe there was some larger goal.
That could be a 3-hour conversation in and of itself. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we invaded Iraq, none of them good. But the one thing that should be acknowledged is that even before 9/11, there was an effort to create the conditions for the United States to go and invade Iraq. They thought that by overthrowing Saddam, that this would lead to an outbreak of peace and democracy across the Middle East. That predated 9/11. And you had things like the Project for a New American Century. You had Paul Wolfowitz at the tail end of the Bush administration very angry that George H.W. Bush didn't go all the way in terms of to Baghdad. And then you had this post Cold War moment where the United States was not simply a superpower, it was a hyperpower. And we had nobody who could effectively challenge us. Russia was a mess. China was still on the upswing. Some smart people saw what was coming, but the assumption was we bring them into the WTO, we do free trade, China's going to become a democracy. And so when you have nobody in the world that can effectively challenge or check you, that can create political conditions domestically that lead people to think that there will be no consequences for American foreign policy. And I also think, too, that our experience in the Balkans and how those wars went also convinced a large part of the American security establishment that, we can deal with Iraq rather cheaply and quickly, and it'd be no big deal. And you saw a lot of that in the early days of the Iraq War, people gloating, people assuming that, once the statue of Saddam in Fidra Square fell down, which, by the way, was, pulled down by Marines from 1st Marine Division, that, we'd be out there pretty quickly. And history showed that that was not the case.
No, it certainly wasn't. Well, whatever the motive, the actions of the U.S. government under George W. Bush greatly strengthened Iran. Removed the main sort of bulwark against their expansion and freed up a lot of cash, as you just said. So here we are. We're facing, enormous pressure to go to war with a country that's not Iraq, that's actually more powerful than Iraq. A lot of this is public information, but to the extent, I know you're doing your best not to reveal anything that's classified. But to the extent you can kind of characterize it using publicly available information, what is the current strength of Iran, do you think, as a military power?
Again, they're quite clearly on their back foot. Anybody who's been watching what has happened to them in the region the last 7-8 months can see that.
Yes.
Hezbollah has suffered significant defeats. Iran lost arguably its closest ally in the region in Bashar al-Assad, lost a key pipeline of weapons and supplies into Lebanon. which restricts their ability to help Hezbollah rebuild itself. They suffered some setbacks from some initial Israeli airstrikes at the end of last year. And I just want to be clear about those airstrikes is that they were very limited and they were very targeted. And the Iranian response was effectively, you can say, looking at it. And again, I don't have any information if this is the case, but it was telegraphed. And so the Israelis knew it was coming. They were prepared. They had American support to help repel it.
It was symbolic, it looked like to me.
Yes, I mean, that's what it appears.
Right.
It appears. So, again, though, we can't deny that they have suffered some significant setbacks. However, they still retain significant conventional military capabilities, a effective missile force. They have effective proxies in Iraq. They have a very effective drone program. And those things, I think the Iranian missile force, more than even a potential nuclear program, and this is based on their experience in the Iran-Iraq war, they very much view their missile force as their ultimate guarantor of regime and national survival. And again, that goes back to their experience in the Iran-Iraq war when Saddam Hussein, sometimes with indirect or direct American support, would use his Scud missiles and Tupolev bombers to effectively bomb and attack Iranian cities, and the Iranians didn't have really an effective defense against them or even a effective way to counterstrike Iraq.
Yes.
They were able to get some Scud missiles from Libya and other sources. It's an interesting story. Gaddafi and Saddam had this kind of rivalry, so Libya, even though being an secular Arab socialist state, kind of like Iraq, they wound up backing Iran, but they were never able to match Iraq's long-range strike capabilities. And so that is a big reason why they have invested so heavily in developing missiles, drones, cruise missiles, and things like that can strike all across the region. And that is really the real threat. And that is...
Iranian conventional weapons, missiles.
Correct, as of right now, yes.
Right. So when we hear that they're weakened, we're talking about their air defenses, mostly.
I won't necessarily get into that, but part of their conventional capabilities have been weakened, but not defeated, and they still retain significant capabilities.
Everybody knows a good night's sleep is super important. It's actually one of the most important things you can do for your health and your sanity, and that's why we are excited to tell you about something that really helps. Beam's Dream Powder. It's proudly an American product. It's run by Americans, people who share the values that you have: hard work, integrity, delivering results. It's science-backed, it's healthy, it's a blend packed with ingredients clinically shown to improve sleep without poisoning you. So you wake up refreshed and ready to take on the day. A good sleep really does make a big difference. Dream is made with a blend of all natural ingredients, including melatonin. It's designed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling not with a drug-type hangover, but feeling great and pure and refreshed. Plus, it tastes good. It's already improved over 17.5 million. It's hard to read that because really 17.5 million nights of sleep. People across the country wake up feeling ready for their day. Beam is giving our listeners, you, the best discount up to 47% off in honor of our 47th president, Donald Trump. So try Dream Powder, get up to 47% off for a limited time. Go to shopbeam.com/Tucker. Use the code Tucker at checkout. Shopbeam.com/Tucker, the code Tucker for up to 47% off in honor of President Trump. An American company, a great product.
It sounds to me like people who've thought a lot about this have reached the conclusion that if we were to participate in a strike on their nuclear facilities, lots of Americans would die.
There's a real potential to that. Again, you can't. There's a saying in the military that no plan survives the first contact, and it's largely true that no assumptions survive the first contact. But
Right.
it's still a significant risk that could happen, and I think it's fair to say is that is weighing in the calculus of a lot of people in the administration.
So the choke point for a lot of the global oil trade is, the very end, the terminus of the entrance to the Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf, the Straits of Hormuz famously. Mm-hmm. And do you think Iran is capable of shutting that off?
I think that is a real risk, if not significantly curtailing the ability to ship energy through that vital sea lane.
And what happens to global oil prices if that happens?
They catastrophically spike. Now, over time, the oil market will sort itself out.
For sure.
You'll have more production here domestically and elsewhere. Oil's fungible. but initially it would have a pretty catastrophic impact on global oil markets at a time where, the United States is facing some economic headwinds.
So you could see catastrophe both in the form of like a global depression potentially and the deaths of a lot of Americans in that region and here in the wake of a war with Iran. The third point that I don't think is ever mentioned in any account I've ever read about these plans to just bomb Iran and rid them of their nuclear program is the fact that Iran is now part of a global coalition of big countries that oppose us.
Now, see, this is very interesting, Tucker, is why are they part of that coalition? And it's because of our own stupidity. We force these countries together that don't naturally have aligned interests. Okay, Iran is a Shiite theocracy. Russia is an authoritarian country run by Vladimir Putin and a group of oligarchs, essentially. China is a quasi-communist, quasi-state capitalist state. North Korea is one of the last true communist authoritarian countries on the face of the earth. A lot of these countries should have natural tension. And there's been points in the post-Cold War era where a country like Russia was willing to do things like not sell weapons to Iran because they didn't want to inflict instability on the Middle East. Russia also traditionally, despite the fact they've supported some of Israel's adversaries, did have a good relationship with Israel. So Israelis, along with the United States, were able to convince the Russians at key points like, hey, don't sell these weapons to Iran or don't do this. And so while they were growing closer, there were still gaps between them. And let's also be honest, too, is Russia has had significant problems with Islamic radicalism in their country. And they don't want to support a regime that in the past has supported Islamic radicals, both Sunni and Shia, across the Middle East and across other parts of the world. They don't want them doing that in certain parts of the world. And so why are they pushed together? Well, it's because we adopted this mindset, and even before the Biden administration adopted this, is that this autocracy versus democracy. And again, it wasn't well defined before that, but we started just bucketing these countries together. Here's a great example: axis of evil. When they said we have this axis of evil of Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. We just talked about it. Iran and Iraq hated each other. They were natural enemies. And by the way, North Korea...
And what does North Korea have to do with it?
Here's an interesting thing. Iraq and North Korea broke off relationships in the Iran-Iraq war because they were so close to the Iranians. And the North Koreans, it appears, may have ripped off the Iraqis in the 90s. They got them. This is, again, it hasn't been confirmed, but they may have ripped them off when the North Koreans offered to sell them weapons. And the North Koreans are actually kind of famous for this. They got the money and said, yeah, we can't give that to you. They actually tried at one point in the early 90s. Again, I can't say if this story is for sure, but I read this on a military blog. They tried to pay for some Russian military equipment with used car parts. So I bring this up in that, and again, Russia and China. These are two countries with historical antagonisms. They've have a shared border that they've during the Soviet times, they fought wars over. They have the Chinese look at Siberia and its resources, and it's growing its own. Its population I don't think is growing right now because they killed 100 million baby girls, but this is an area with resources that they need and that there's been in the past conflicts over. There should be tension between those two countries, but our foreign policy of bucketing them all together, sanctioning them, treating them as one united front has kind of willed it into existence.
Has made them one united front.
Yes, and it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to pull them apart because they have interests that don't align. We should be able to be working more with the Russians. And I hope that, if again, Steve Witkoff is successful and others in the administration, there's a lot of great people in the administration working on Russia, Ukraine right now. If they're successful, we can hopefully maybe get to a better place with Russia and they can help us with Iran.
Let me just ask you to pause it. It's everything you're saying is, by the way, in the public sphere. You're not guessing about any of this. It's obvious. No honest person would deny it. And it's so crazy, these policies, that it's almost like they were formulated by people who are trying to tank the United States. I mean, these are policies that are hostile to American interests, not indifferent.
I think maybe that's a possibility, but the more I've interacted with some of these people and seen them up close, it's almost giving them too much credit. I mean,
never attribute to conspiracy what stupidity can explain. Is that what you're saying?
There's definitely evil forces at play, but a lot of this is stupidity and laziness. In my albeit short time in the Pentagon, like with Ukraine, a lot of people in the Pentagon wanted to keep doing what we were doing in Ukraine. Some of them really had an ideological commitment to the Ukrainian project. I think a lot of the officers
a more transgender Eastern Europe.
Zelensky has a savior of global liberalism. The
war against Christianity, they're all in. Yeah.
I think that because of their experience, in some ways you can somewhat sympathize with it, is that they did sympathize with Ukraine. But, I saw a lot of it, and a lot of it was it's easier to say we should keep doing what we're doing than admit that we had been screwing things up and think of a different way to do things. I think that more than ideology, and ideology plays an important role, the belief the American needs to be the global hegemon to, enforce liberal hegemony. But really, for a lot of the people, and I think the same applies to State Department, it's just easier to say.
I believe that. I've spent a lot of time around the bureaucracy. I think that's right. It's just like there's a physics principle. Objects in motion tend to stay that way.
Yeah.
So, no, I completely believe that. But big picture, just like swooping out a little bit, another Middle Eastern war. Like, I think the overwhelming majority of Americans, and certainly the overwhelming majority of Trump voters, like, wait a second, no. So, and in fact, the president was elected to some large extent on the promise to not get us involved in another forever war. So I just have really been struck, but you're the expert, by how much pressure is applied to the administration to do this, to get us involved in another war in the Middle East. Did you feel that?
I think there clearly is a very strong coalition within the United States that wants us to see another war in the Middle East, and it crosses both parties. Just to point something out, and I wrote about this in Foreign Affairs with a friend of mine, Reed Smith. During the campaign, the Democrats attacked Trump for being too dovish on Iran. And they attacked him for not doing more after killing Soleimani, not doing more after some of the Iranian drone strikes on Saudi Arabia in 2019. They accused him of being too weak on Iran. And the Democrat Party trotted out Liz Cheney, of all people, and the endorsement of her father, had her going to battleground states, talking about the importance of staying, quote, strong in the Middle East and continuing to fund an unwinnable war in Ukraine. And that was the position they adopted. So it's kind of transcended the traditional right-left way we think about American foreign policy that came into being at the end of the Cold War, or even before that. It really predates the end of the Cold War. It really goes back to the Cold War, where in the post-Vietnam era especially, the Democrats were the doves, Republicans were the hawks. It really kind of transcends that. And you have this transpartisan movement to keep America engaged in the world. And I think it's good for America to be engaged in the world, but engaged in the world so that their primary purpose is not to protect American interests or safety or the conditions of American prosperity, but to ensure that America is enforcing liberal hegemony. So getting back to Iran, there's a lot of reasons why people want war with Iran. I think when it comes down to it, is a lot of people still think you can do regime change wars successfully in the Middle East.
Regime change wars? I thought this was all about getting rid of the whatever half dozen Iranian nuclear sites because we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
Well, I think Donald Trump has exposed them because they're essentially, some of the biggest advocates of war with Iran, whether it's groups like Foundation for Defense of Democracy, writers at certain publications, essentially they are saying the problem with diplomacy is it doesn't lead to regime change, is that the policy should be regime change. It's almost like the nuclear issue is really about creating a pathway to regime change. And it really still goes back to this idea, is a lot of them deep down inside believe, and some of them say it out loud, that we could have made Iraq successful. And Iraq is just a mess. It is an absolute just cluster.
Well, it's a proxy of Iran, too,
yes,
the country they hate.
Let me just make a note on this. The most deadly forces in the middle, the forces that pose the most risk to the United States forces, are the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. They are an official arm of the Iraqi government that we created after the invasion of Iraq in 2003, which we fund through aid, and whose troops that we train, still with couple thousand troops in Iraq. So American troops in Iraq right now are getting attacked by people who are part of the same government that American troops are helping to support and whose security forces are helping to train. It is the most counterproductive and insane foreign policy mission in the globe right now, and I hope the administration will make changes to that. But that's how
I
insane
don't
it
understand.
is.
So, in the last, 22 years, 24 years, I guess, since 9/11, amazing. Our record with regime change in the Middle East has been like 100% failure.
Yeah, and if you go to Libya, you go to Syria,
But
it's been
failure on
disaster.
every level. It hasn't.
Yes. Even Yemen, you can include Yemen because we backed the old government before it collapsed and Yemen devolved into a civil
It
war.
hasn't made the United States safer or richer. It hasn't, by the way, I would argue, made our allies safer either. However much they may have wanted it hasn't been good for them either, that I can see. And it's been a disaster for millions of people, human beings, in those countries. But mostly it hasn't helped the United States. So how could you, with a straight face, advocate for yet another regime change war against a real country that's not Libya, not Iraq, it's Iran, it's the Persian Empire? Like, how could you say that out loud? Are they actually saying that out loud?
Yeah, I mean, some of them do say it out loud, yes. Is that they think, the Shah, the Shah's son has reemerged. I mean, this guy is he's the ultimate fail son, in my view. And then you have groups like the MEK, People's Mujahideen of Iran, who pay a lot of American politicians to advocate for them and advocate for regime change. They are essentially saying, hey, we have governments in waiting that can just swoop in there and everything will be fine if you just get rid of the mullahs. Where have we heard that before?
It's hard to believe this is actually real.
I know, it is. It is hard to
It's
believe
ignoring the most obvious facts of the last 30 years.
Yeah. It goes back to what I was saying about what I observed in the Pentagon, I think, is that it's easier to advocate for the same things over and over again than to say we should do something different.
But what do you make of the senator? I mean, maybe you have a different experience, but I just hear constantly about Republican senators. I'm sure there are Democrats too, but I hear about the Republicans, Lindsey Graham being the most obvious, but many others, constantly applying pressure to the administration to have a regime change war against Iran. I'm not going to confirm your nominees. We're going to hassle, threatening the Trump administration in order to force them to lead a regime change war against Iran. What could possibly be their motive? What is that?
Look, I think, and I've talked about this before in my past jobs, I think there's a disconnect in Washington, D.C. among elected Republicans, with the exception of those in the White House currently, between the base, what the base actually believes on foreign policy, and so the base very much doesn't want new wars.
Like the voters you're talking about, people who put them there.
And time again, you saw the majority of Republican voters in a lot of these primaries saying that they wanted fewer wars. Is the Republicans in a lot of cases were now less hawkish overall. And, polling, it doesn't tell the whole story all the time, but you saw voters, generally the Democrats were getting more hawkish primarily because of Ukraine, but you saw Republican voters and independent voters becoming more and more wary of foreign wars. However, because foreign policy, for a lot of voters, is often not a highly salient issue, it's not in their top three, a lot of Republicans and Democrats are able to get elected despite having horrible records on foreign policy. Now, there are elections where it makes a difference. 2016, for example, there's real evidence that the fact that Donald Trump was viewed as less hawkish than Hillary Clinton played a decisive role in him winning Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The counties that flipped from Obama to Trump, they had higher levels of what you call military sacrifice, so troops deployed, wounded, or killed, than some of their adjacent counties. So that likely contributed both to his 2016 and possibly his 2024 victory. Now, I have good, dear friends of mine that they're much smarter than me on polling and social science. They may disagree with that, but there have been times where actually the political incentives are to be less hawkish. But those don't show up in most elections. So you have a lot of Republican leaders in particular that are just disconnected from the base. Now, I think the good news is, though, is you're starting to see that change. And you saw that play out with Ukraine aid, where I think the last major Ukraine aid vote, and it may actually be the last major Ukraine aid vote yet ever, is I think you had over half of Senate Republicans vote against it and more than half of House members vote against it. And that went from Like, you only had 6 Republicans voting against the first big Ukraine aid package in 2022, and only 40 House Republicans to now, I believe, about 26, 27 senators, and then nearly 110, 113, somewhere in that range, House Republicans voting against it. So you've seen changes, and definitely the Republicans elected since 2018 in both the House and Senate, they're far less hawkish than people elected before then. That's indisputable.
Well, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. And I don't think anyone who puts the interest of the United States first, who really does in his heart, could come around to another regime change war in Iran. Like, that's almost prima facie evidence that you are not putting your country's interests first. That's the way it feels to me. Maybe I'm being uncharitable.
No, and I think this goes back to a simple belief of what is the purpose of American foreign policy. I believe, and I think President Trump, Vice President Vance, I believe even Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, and others in the administration fundamentally believe the purpose of American foreign policy is to ensure American safety and the conditions of our prosperity. That doesn't mean we're going to ensure 3% GDP growth. It's the things that enable us to be prosperous. So, like, for example, prioritizing the defense of the Panama Canal over the negligible issue of which Eastern European oligarch gets to loot the Donbass. Like, they believe that that is more important, because the Panama Canal indisputably is more important to us than who controls the Donbass or who controls some desolate patch of desert in the Middle East.
So nicely put.
Well, Easter is finally here, and there's no better way to remember the story of Christ. Jesus dying for your sins is the most powerful thing that's ever happened in history. It is really the beginning of history, and it's worth celebrating. This Easter, embrace the freedom of the resurrection on Hallow, which is the #1 prayer app in the world. Join Liz Tabish, who plays Mary Magdalene in The Chosen, actor Kevin James, and others in an immersive and jubilant prayer experience worthy of Easter itself. Every single day, you learn how to walk in freedom amidst the circumstances often crushing of your daily life, and let go of the things that you're attached to and that are causing suffering, and instead embrace the peace and freedom that come when you place your trust in God, which is the only place to place your trust. So enter the joy of Easter with a brief prayer, reflection, meditation every single day that will help you continue the habits that will change everything, the ones you established during Lent. We love Hallow here. We love the app. We know you will too. It's got thousands of prayers, meditations, music, help you build a daily habit of prayer and to grow closer to God. Download Hallow today at hallow.com/Tucker. You get 3 months for free. You'll be grateful you did. Honestly, you will be.
How did you get involved in all of this? What's your story? And can I say, when I should have asked at the outset, what was you just left the Pentagon under circumstances I hope we can talk about. What were you doing when you left?
So I was a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense. I was focused on policy. I was the senior advisor in the front office for policy. And so my job day to day was advising the Secretary on policy, making sure that he was prepared for meetings, making sure that he was prepared for giving certain speeches and talks, and then providing him policy advice as needed. We had a very smart policy team, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, who just was confirmed, thank God, Bridge Colby. He's doing a great job. But the way the Pentagon works is you need somebody in the front office that can connect the Secretary effectively to policy. And policy has so many jobs and so many things they have to focus on that you need somebody in the front office that can help be that immediate policy advisor that is able to walk in and talk to the Secretary right away.
Right. Okay. Is that the job that you dreamed about as a child? Like, how did you wind up here?
You know, it's funny. There was a part of me that didn't even want to go into the Pentagon. It wasn't necessarily something that I dreamed of. I mean, I think my first job I was really obsessed with, like a lot of young boys, was being a firefighter.
Yeah.
And then
where'd you grow up?
I was born in California, lived in Massachusetts for a while, but home is Scottsdale, Arizona. That's where I consider home. My kids were born there. My parents still live there. My grandma still lives there. I still have a lot of family there, and that will always be home for me.
So how did you were in the military?
Yes, the Marine Corps.
You were in the Marine Corps. How did you wind up in the Marine Corps?
So I went to a Jesuit all-boys school, and the last 2 years are very intense. And the expectation was everybody's going to go to college. And by the end of my time in high school, I didn't want to do more academics. I didn't want to go to college, but it was the thing you had to do. So I dragged myself down to Tucson to go to the University of Arizona. And candidly, I was miserable. I didn't have any motivation to go to class or do stuff, and I just was hating life. And then one day, my best friend just a dear friend. I love him to death, James O'Connor. He was
From high school?
From high school. He had dropped out of Arizona State University and enlisted in the Army as a paratrooper like his dad, and was attached to 101st as part of the Pathfinder unit. And he was in Iraq at in the summer. He went to Iraq in the fall of 2005. And I remember him on AOL Instant Messenger sending me a message saying, my team almost got hit by an IED. And I was kind of like, what am I doing here? I need to get in the fight. Because growing up, you asked me what I wanted to do, is I was very interested in military history. And my grandfather, who is very important to me, he was a paratrooper, but I became obsessed with the Marine Corps. And he had me read 2 books, The Nightingale Song, about...
Amazing book. Yeah.
It's an amazing book. I still go and read it every couple of years.
Honestly, he released, I think he's passed away now,
he has,
Baltimore Sun reporter, but he released a longer version, kind of unexpurgated version, which is amazing.
And then he had me read Fields of Fire by Jim Webb.
Oh my gosh.
And Jim Webb is one of my personal
Those are both
heroes.
Vietnam books.
Yeah. And so they had an unvarnished view of the Marine Corps, but I still wanted to be part of that. And so, so James, I get the message from James, and I say, I got to get out of here. Dropped out, told my parents, who are apoplectic. And
they weren't impressed.
Yeah, they were scared. And I still feel bad about that fear I put in them, because I went and I enlisted in the infantry. I didn't go...
In the Marine Corps? You enlisted?
Yes, as an 0311 in the Marine Corps. Now, my first 2 years in the Marine Corps...
That's like the least glamorous thing you can do.
You know what? For some people, yes. And I know that you have some Marines that work for you.
Yeah.
But...
Enlisted Marines.
Yeah. And all due respect to them, but there was a saying in the infantry, is like, if you ain't infantry, you ain't shit.
Yeah.
And everything the Marine Corps did, from its fighter squadrons to its artillery to its tanks, was in support of the enlisted riflemen locating with and destroying the enemy and repelling enemy assault by fire maneuver. And so everything was in support of the 0311 doing its job. And so I love being in the infantry. And there was kind of this thing like, if you were infantry, like you felt, whether it was true or not, you're cut above the rest, your life sucked more, but that was a point of pride. And I love that. And so, but my first 2 years...
So you just, bottom line, you drop out of college and enlist
Yes.
in the Marine Corps during a war.
Yes, this was 2005. Things were going just swimmingly in Iraq then. Right. Afghanistan was kind of on a simmer, but it was, still bad before getting much, much worse. So my first 2 years, in boot camp, I was selected for a program called Yankee White, and this is the Presidential Support Program. So if you've ever seen the Marines saluting in front of the White House,
yes.
They're part of the Presidential Support Program. And as part of that, I went to be part of the Marine Security Force at Camp David. So I spent, I think, almost 2 years up there, about that, while President Bush was president. And that was a great duty station. I loved it. Some of my closest friends, still to this day, I served with up there. And it was a great command. I had a great first sergeant, great commanding officer, great platoon sergeant. So I spent 2 years there. And then once my time was up there, I went to 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, which is very lucky. I got put in another great company, Fox Company 2-1. And we did a workup, and we did a deployment to Iraq. And this was end of 2008, 2009. I'll be honest, it was not as bad as it was in Ramadi and Fallujah a few years before. And it was mostly an uneventful deployment with some exceptions. There was, some incidents and things like that. But you kind of left Iraq at that time thinking, okay, this isn't going to be like the new, this isn't going to be Scottsdale, Arizona anytime soon. But this could kind of work. This could kind of be like Tijuana, Mexico. But
the strip clubs.
Yeah, but 5 years later, with the exception of Al-Assad, every place that I was at in Iraq was under the control of ISIS.
The places you were personally?
Yes.
That you had been?
From the city of Hit to South Sinjar, the mountain where the Yazidis were trapped, where there was those massacres and they enslaved...
all the women?
Yeah. We were all around Mount Sinjar. We spent a lot of time with the Yazidis. Just very interesting people. Their religion is very interesting.
Yes.
They worship what a lot of Westerners would call the devil. I don't think that's very accurate, but they were very pro-American. They were always dressed in colorful outfits, and they come and wave at us. And whereas when you were in the Sunni parts, they just kind of ignore you, and they're like, "When are you guys going to leave?" And so 5 years after that, all had fallen apart, and that was...
And a lot of those people who waved at you were dead or sex slaves.
Yeah, I have a picture of myself on my Twitter with 2 young Yazidi boys, and they're either dead or they're in a refugee camp. I maybe they were able to go back, but that's probably the reality of that, unfortunately.
Where were you 5 years later by the time you saw this?
I was working at Concerned Veterans for America. That's where I met Pete Hegseth. And one thing that happened over those 5 years and continued to happen is so I did 2 things. I learned a lot about why the war started, learned about the decisions that brought us there, and I didn't have an overnight transition. It took a while for it to happen, but I saw the impact on my community of veterans, and it's only gotten worse since then.
What was I'm sure you could talk for hours on it, but if you could sum up the effect of the Iraq War on guys you knew, what would it be?
So 3 Marines that I served with, either in 2-1 or Camp David, were killed in action. A half dozen were seriously wounded, including some that are double amputees. This is all in Afghanistan. Well, a few in Iraq. As we sit here, I believe about 20 have committed suicide or died as a result of service-related injuries.
20?
That's for people who serve in the infantry. That's very common. There were infantry units who fought in the Battle of Fallujah and Ramadi and other very intense conflicts that have suffered more Marines who have killed themselves than were actually killed in action. And
you really try to navigate this topic without being filled with hate. You don't want to become a hater. But it's hard when you hear stuff like that and you think of someone like David Frum, not even an American, screaming at people, calling them bigots for not wanting to engage in another regime change war. I mean, it's hard.
It's a disgrace that he is allowed in good and proper company. I think the Iraq War was a monstrous crime. That's the only way I can describe it. It was a crime first and foremost against the Iraqi people and then the Syrian people, because those 2 wars are clearly connected. ISIS essentially was formed in American prisons. ISIS sprung out of Zarqawi's group, but the leadership, like Baghdadi and even the new president of Syria, Jolani, they were in American prisons, and they met people that would eventually help form their core leadership teams in al-Nusra, which is the al-Qaeda branch, and then ISIS. Baghdadi met in prison, an American prison, Iraqi military leaders and started to learn more about military tactics. And a lot of those people he was in prison with would be the people that would help him take over most of Iraq and Syria.
You're not the first person I've asked this of, but what did it feel like as someone who actually served there, who wanted to serve there, dropped out of college to enlist, not go into ROTC, but to enlist in the Marine Corps? You gave your whole life to it, and then to see the carnage, the Americans whose lives were destroyed, and then realize this was all kind of fake. What effect did that have on you?
It started really pushing me to where I'm at now in foreign policy. We need to do something differently. And it kind of radicalized me in a certain way on this. And really, there's an argument that you need to be, when you're talking about foreign policy, you kind of need to be cold and detached. Some people say that realists need to be cold and detached. I don't necessarily buy that. But, when I hear about launching a new military operation, somebody talk about something, my first thought is, what's it going to be like for the guys? What's it going to be like for the boys that are going to be in the front? And, men and women too. That's kind of you can't help but look through it for that prism. And it's sometimes you do have to detach yourself from it, but yeah, that's what I really think of. But the big thing is, we have to stop this from happening again. This cannot happen again.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I wish more people would articulate this perspective. I think it's pretty. So, among the guys you serve with in the Marine Corps in Iraq, would you say many agree with you?
Yes. Right, left. Most of them are rabidly anti-interventionist. Some of them make me look like Paul Wolfowitz.
And you're talking about the guys who served, who carried rifles in Iraq.
Yes. Yeah. And we did, at Concerned Veterans for America, we did a lot of polling when I was there, and we consistently found that the veterans and military family population was more opposed to new wars by pretty noticeable margins than the general population as a whole.
It's interesting. So you mentioned death killed in action. You mentioned injuries, profound injuries. You mentioned suicide, psychological injuries.
And I'm sorry, I didn't even mention broken families.
Well, that's it. That's what I was about to ask.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I mean, high rates of divorce.
High rates of divorce. We were talking before we went on the air. I know a lot of enlisted Marines. My dad was one. I don't know. I don't think I know any guys who enlisted the Marine Corps during the War on Terror who aren't divorced. I'm sure there are, but am I imagining this?
There are some combat arms and special forces communities that have 90% divorce rates.
90%.
Yes.
We undervalue that. Like, that is a disaster for the people involved and for their children. Like, that's a true tragedy. True tragedy. Divorce is a death. And so if you've got 90% divorce rates like that, I don't know why no one pauses to say, how can we not do this to people?
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yes. Now, look, I mean, divorce has always been a problem in the military. You have a lot of guys, getting married too young to get out of the barracks. We were talking about that beforehand.
Yeah.
But it's the strain of deployments on these specific units that just spikes divorce rates in certain units. And when you have guys that are spending 70-80% of their time away from home, either training to be deployed or deployed, it's hard. And military service is always going to be hard, but the increased deployment tempo we've had, particularly post 9/11, is exacerbated that.
Well, that's the first thing I noticed when I started covering all this stuff or going over there. It's like these guys were doing like a crazy number of deployments. Yeah. And I just think you're going to destroy a man over time if you keep sending him to war, no?
Yeah.
How could you not?
Yes, I think everybody has a breaking point, and there are guys who are able to do. I mean, there are people in Ranger units that are on their 15th, 16th deployment. Guys who've been in for over 20 years.
What does that do to you?
I mean, there's so many things it can do to you. I mean, there's some people that are able to just turn it on and off and put it in a box, but I would say that for everybody, just physically, it breaks you down. You got 38-year-old guys that have bodies of 60-year-olds, and just mentally, it just can wear you down as well too.
I've argued with Dan Crenshaw in public a lot. I made fun of him a lot, and I mean this with true sincerity. I look at that guy and I'm like, you were damaged by war. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know Dan Crenshaw, but I do know a lot of people who have been damaged by their experience, like really damaged by their experience.
I'd say that he's kind of an outlier too in the community, where he's still, for whatever reason, is supporting American primacy and the status quo. And, most of his fellow veterans in the Republican side are actually rejecting that. So
well, they hate him, and I certainly understand why. But he's unbalanced. Like, that guy's, it's not that we have like a disagreement over policies. Like, that guy, there's something really wrong with him. And maybe I'm being too generous, but I just have to suspect, knowing a lot of guys like that.
I can understand why you said that. I mean, he threatened to kill you, right?
He threatened to kill me, but I'm not worried about that. I just I'm trying to be Christian and generous about this. Like, he's a very damaged person, and perhaps he always was. But I know a bunch of damaged people who went through those experiences. You must also.
It's been devastating on our community. It really has.
Oh.
And there's some people that say, the word they try to soften it. Oh, you shouldn't use the word damaged. That's the proper word to describe it.
Well, I'm saying that with love and compassion and gratitude for everything they've done for us and for their patriotism and decency. And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying that as you would about someone you care about and you hate to see them hurt. I mean.
Yeah. I agree.
So you get out of the Marine Corps. What do?
So I finished up college. I didn't really want to go to college, but I blew through in like two and a half years. I worked for a member of Congress for a couple of years.
How were you feeling when you got out of there? Did it have lasting effects on you?
My first few months out of the Marine Corps were tough. There was some stuff in my personal life that was happening. My father, this is when the economy was really bad. My father passed away from drug overdose, and then leaving the Marine Corps, leaving a group of guys you had thought were your brothers and living in an apartment by yourself, that had a negative, that was not a fun time. I thought it was going to be a blast. I have a bunch of money saved up from deployment. I'm going to go on the GI Bill. I'm going to, a party school. And I just eventually just said, hey, I'm just going to get through college. I want to get a job. I got married. And so I just blew through college, and then I got a job working for a member of Congress out in Arizona. And I was primarily focused on veterans constituent work at first, and that was actually fulfilling, helping veterans get benefits. And I learned a lot about how dysfunctional the VA was and how dysfunctional the Department of Defense was too, because, helping guys with problems with the DoD. And after 2.5 years there, just to be candid, I needed to make more money. I had, by that time, I had a child. And so a friend of mine introduced me to Concerned Veterans for America, which at the time was run by Pete Hegseth. And I was recruited there first as somebody doing some field work, and then eventually as legislative and one of the policy directors.
How long were you there?
I was affiliated with Concerned Veterans for America in one capacity or another for, almost 9 years.
Wow.
I was eventually the executive director, and then even when I moved to a new job, I retained a senior advisor role.
Huh. And were you close to Pete the whole time?
When he was with Concerned Veterans for America, yes, we worked very closely together, along with Darren Selnick, who's another individual that left the Pentagon last week. And I was primarily working with him on policy and comms, mainly focused on our efforts to fix the Department of Veterans Affairs.
So fast forward to the 2024 campaign, Trump wins in November, and there's a mad scramble to staff the administration. What role did you play in that?
So early on, even before the election, it was very informal because, President Trump didn't initially do a formal transition that you'd seen before, which actually I think in some ways was a good idea. At the time, I maybe didn't understand why, but because of all the leaks and stuff that had hurt him in the first campaign, it ultimately became a much better run transition. And I think a lot of the credit goes to, of course, the president himself, but Susie Wiles, and I think Sergio Gore as well, too, was heading personnel. So I was working with a group of people early on to identify people that could serve in the Department of Defense. And one day I get a call from someone and was told, hey, what do you know about Pete Hegseth? I give, a few bullets about what I know about him. And then, I call Pete. And we had still stayed in touch, but we weren't, working as closely together as we much before. It was like, hey, just so you know, the transition was asking questions about you. And he says, yeah, I know. I'm being considered for the role of Secretary of Defense. It's like, wow, okay. That's cool. And so a few days later, through Veterans Day weekend, he gets the job. And I started working with him during his confirmation. I helped him during the confirmation, helped him defend against a lot of the attacks that were made against him, helped with strategy. But what I eventually took over was being his main link to the personnel operation. So helping to vet and place personnel within the Department of Defense. And so I'd fly down to Florida a lot and work with some really great people on the PPO. They're now on the PPO team in doing that. And so I did.
So you're not working for the government at this point?
No. I'm doing this on a volunteer basis, and, I was paying out these flights out of my own pocket.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you get reimbursed?
As of now, no.
Now, we're sure you've heard plenty of those free phone promises from America's biggest wireless carriers. If those deals sound too good to be true, it's probably because they are very often too good to be true. They come with layers of fine print requiring you to sign up for 4 lines, plus activation fees, plus this, that, the other thing. You don't even understand what you're signing up for, and by the time you're done, you've paid for that free phone 3x. It was a pretty expensive free phone. It's kind of a scam, honestly. Our wireless company is called Pure Talk, and it's got a much better and much more straightforward offer, and it comes with no strings whatsoever attached. With a qualifying plan of just $35 a month, you get legitimately the brand new Samsung Galaxy A26 for free. It's actually free. There aren't hidden costs. You're not signing up the rest of your life or promising to name your kid after them or something. From virtually indestructible Gorilla Glass to next-generation camera lenses, the phone has basically everything that you want. All you need to do is switch to Pure Talk. $35 a month for unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data with mobile hotspot, all on America's most dependable 5G network. Go to puretalk.com/Tucker to claim your free Samsung Galaxy with qualifying plan when you switch to Pure Talk, wireless by Americans for Americans.
So you're paying your way down to help Pete Hegseth. You're obviously strongly in favor of Pete Hegseth, or you wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah. I was very strongly supportive of him becoming Secretary of Defense.
Yeah. Yes, I know him obviously very well. I work with him. He's such a good guy.
And I would just say, there's a lot of stories eventually written about me and the personnel that I was, the puppet master, and that I had ultimate decision rights, and that I was trying to block people that supported this or that or opposed this and that. It was all nonsense. I mean, let me tell you, again, I've already used this already, but there were people on the PPO team that were much more hardcore in foreign policy than I was. And so in a lot of cases, I didn't even need to block unaligned people. They were already getting blocked by people, earlier in the process.
Well, I must say, I don't think a fair listener could accuse you of being radical in any sense. You seem totally mainstream to me. Nothing you've said seems ideological or crazy or fringe or anything like that. You served in the Marine Corps during a war. You didn't think that our policy was serving the country or the people who defend it. And you're just trying to keep that foremost in mind as you help create policy for the next generation.
Yes.
Is that a fair?
I think that's, I obviously biased. I think it's totally fair. And I just would point out is that one thing that was amazing about working on the transition, it was tough sometimes, it was frustrating sometimes, and then in the administration was, there are so many good people in this administration. I remember I worked a lot with, I never went in, but I worked a lot with the first Trump administration. And you can see me on the internet. I was standing behind the president when he was signing veterans bills all the time. The president tweeted about one of my media appearances once. I remember where I would have people from the White House and from the VA trying to talk me and Concerned Veterans for America out of supporting something the president wanted. Particularly VA choice, is giving choice to veterans or making it easier to fire bad VA employees. These are political appointees saying, why do you want to do that? That's too radical. Just we need to fix this or that on the margin. And in this time around, you have, I think, just like any administration, there are people that aren't on board with the president. But one of the coolest things, I would just say, working in the administration was having friends and people that share your mindset across the interagency.
Yes.
And being able to call them up and bounce ideas off each other. And that was a really good experience, I will say. And you saw that transition too.
Well, you feel it. You feel it. And it I'm not involved at all. I'm just watching. But it seems like the fastest way to derail the whole project, the Trump administration and the United States of America, is a war with Iran. And that's why I've just been watching it as carefully as I can, because I feel like, again, if you hated Donald Trump and you hated what the administration is doing on immigration, trade, anti-wokeness, whatever, and you wanted to stop it, the first thing you would do is apply pressure to have the U.S. military engage in a war with Iran. I mean, that's my perspective on it anyway.
I think that, and also continuing to do what we've been doing previously in Russia, Ukraine.
For sure. Though I don't know why. Well, I'm going to ask you all about this, but it feels like Witkoff is helping a lot there. God bless.
I've already said he's a godsend.
God bless Steve Witkoff. I couldn't agree more. As a man and as an instrument of peace and a figure now out of history. Okay, so you did make, just from an outsider's perspective, one maybe career mistake by giving on-the-record interviews before you went in, describing your foreign policy views, which I think are fully within the mainstream of the world in the U.S., but out of the mainstream among, warmongers in Washington. So, people knew that you weren't fully on board with the regime change program. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I was very open about it. I was very on the record about it. And most of the time when I was saying that we shouldn't do this, it was actually in support of, the president's stated preferences. Like, the president clearly doesn't want this. In the first term, there were people in his administration that wanted it. He clearly didn't want it. And so it was supporting people who didn't want the war. And so I was essentially...
But Donald Trump has said, and now his actions make perfectly clear, he would strongly prefer a diplomatic solution.
Correct. I don't want to speak for the president, but it's fairly obvious that that's what he wants.
Well, he said it. I mean, He said it again, and he ran on it. So it's not a crazy position. And now things are getting so bonkers in this country that saying that makes you a bigot or something, a Nazi. I'm just going to ignore all that. And I just want to get back to your experience. So I'm just watching this from the outside, and I'm thinking, having spent my life in D.C., I was like, Dan Caldwell's got a target on his back that I don't know if he knows that.
Yeah.
And then I read all of a sudden that you're a traitor. You're marched out of the Pentagon for leaking, right? And then the whispering campaign, the character assassination campaign begins, and here's its outline. I don't want to upset you. You may not even be aware of this. Dan Caldwell leaked classified information to liberal media outlets, to the media, to NBC News, for example. So I just want to be totally direct with you. Did you leak classified information against the wishes of your superiors to media outlets?
Absolutely not.
Did you photograph classified material and then text pictures of that material to an NBC News reporter?
Absolutely not, and I have not spoken to an NBC reporter while at the Pentagon.
Do you know what you've been accused of?
No, I don't. Sitting here right now, myself and Darren Selnick and Colin Carroll, the other two individuals that were escorted out of the Pentagon, initially placed on leave and then fired on Friday, we have not been told, as of this recording, one, is there what we were being investigated for? Two, is there still an investigation? And three, was there even a real investigation? Because there's a lot of evidence that there is not a real investigation. But again, sitting here right now, there are a lot of unknowns about this. As a former Secretary of Defense would say, there's a lot of unknown unknowns. There are some things that are pretty clear, but we have no idea what specifically we're being investigated
for.
So
we can know some things just by the details. So here are a couple. Have you been polygraphed?
No. I've never been hooked up to a polygraph machine since I've been in the Department of Defense.
Okay. Have you given up your private communications devices, your private phone, your phone?
No.
To anybody?
No.
Okay. So that raises the obvious question. I'm trying not to use the F word here because the lying is just driving me insane. You're being accused of leaking classified information, but the people accusing you would have no way of knowing whether you did that or not because they haven't polygraphed you or taken your devices, your private devices, correct?
I mean, there are...
You can't even make the allegation because there's no conceivable way you can prove that.
Let me just say, there are so many different things that would prevent me from doing the things that you've laid out. And again, I don't even know if that's what I'm really being investigated for, again, if there's a real investigation. But all these, the point is so what I have told some people who have asked me about what's going on is I would repeat something that I heard in the Marine Corps in our work up to Iraq. I believe it was in something called a combat hunter course, which isn't what it sounds like. It's actually about observing things better. And I remember an instructor very clearly saying, when you're in this environment, believe nothing of what you hear and only half of what you say. And I think this needs to apply to this situation.
Yeah, the problem with it is it's just a very serious allegation that you betrayed your boss and friend, Pete Hegseth, who you've worked with for like over a decade, who you supported from the very beginning. I think that's all. I don't want to speak for you, but you're being accused of betraying Hegseth, who's under attack from people who want a war with Iran. Let's just be totally blunt about it. And so you're being accused of betraying him, betraying the president, and committing a crime. That's a crime. So this is not just like, hey, Dan Caldwell's got bad taste in neckties. This is like Dan Caldwell's a criminal.
Yeah, it's just, there's sometimes I think it just hasn't fully set in with me and
yes.
what's going on. And I want to talk about the two other gentlemen that are going through this with me. And what's going on with them in some ways is more infuriating because, as you said, I have a public profile. I took some what shouldn't be controversial positions but are. And, I was out there, advancing things that a lot of people in the foreign policy establishment didn't want. Doesn't justify what's happening to me, but let's just be honest, that is the nature of the games played in D.C. Darren Selnick and Colin Carroll are patriots. Let me talk about Darren a little bit. Darren's another person that worked with Secretary Hegseth for over a decade. He is somebody who's spent decades working around veterans and military health issues. He served in the first Bush administration at the VA. He served a critical role in the first Trump administration. He was a key player in advancing the VA Mission Act, one of the greatest accomplishments of the first Trump administration, which fundamentally reformed how the VA delivers healthcare. Darren, I think, can go to bed every night saying he saved thousands of veterans' lives because of the reforms he helped advance. He's an Air Force veteran. In between his stints in government, he worked at Concerned Veterans for America with me and Pete, helping develop revolutionary reforms to the VA that in large part were implemented by the first Trump administration. To come back, he left his nice life in Oceanside, California. His wife, stayed behind, and he got, a crummy apartment in Arlington, Virginia, and worked sometimes 16, 17-hour days to advance the secretary's agenda. He played a key role in ripping out woke and DEI nonsense from the administration. Darren was a key driver of that. So by your description of Darren Selnick, he doesn't sound like he
is engaged in like the policy fights, or he's like some crazed ideologue.
So before I talk about Colin, Colin has not transitioned as far as I know. But I don't actually know what Darren Selnick and Colin Carroll think about Iran. Darren Selnick could be a secret 12er Shia for all I know. Colin Carroll could want to, nuke Iran until the sand glows. Darren was he was deputy chief of staff focused on back-end office operations and personnel and military health policy. Colin Carroll, let me talk about Colin because he's, I think, an incredible individual too. Colin was a Naval Academy graduate. He served as a recon Marine in combat. Then he literally became a rocket scientist, working in tech, working in companies like Anduril, and he was Steve Feinberg's chief of staff. Colin's focus was on science, R&E, and budget. He was down and in. And these gentlemen were patriots, and they did not deserve to, none of us deserve to get treated this way, but in some ways angers me more than what's going on with them.
And it's not even clear. I should say at the outset that the Pentagon DoD is the largest human organization in the world, has more people than any.
Correct.
I think in the history of the world, and there's a lot at stake. The future of the world's at stake. It's DoD. They have nuclear weapons, and so the pressure exerted on that agency from outside, but also the fighting within it, make it like one of the most complicated and treacherous work environments ever created. Is that fair?
That is fair. And I will say the one thing we had in common, there's a couple things we have in common, was we were threatening a lot of established interests in our own separate ways. And we had people who had personal vendettas against us.
Yes,
I think they weaponized the investigation against us. I think that's part of what's going on here. But look, Colin, and let me just say, Steve Feinberg, I didn't know him before this. I have a lot of respect for him.
I do too.
I think he's going to be a fantastic deputy secretary. Steve Feinberg and Colin were going to shake up how acquisitions are done, how the budgeting is done, how we do science and research. And Colin's got one speed, and that's go. And he wasn't afraid to challenge people when they're acting stupid and wanted to keep doing the same thing. Darren's the same way. Darren upset a lot of the people that want to keep using the military to be a giant social science experiment.
Right.
So and of course, I have some views about the role of America in the world that, as we've discussed, are a little controversial. All of us in our own ways threatened really established interests.
Your views are only controversial in Washington, D.C. Let me tell you that as a matter of fact.
Correct.
They are not controversial anywhere else in this country or the world.
We threatened a lot of established interests inside the building and outside the building.
So I just want to restate, because this is this is why you're here, because you got bounced out and you're being accused of betraying your boss, your president, your nation. You have, I don't want to speak for you, not leaked classified information to the news media. You've never undergone a polygraph exam, and you've never handed over your personal phone. Are all those statements true?
That is all 100% correct. And let me just say, actually, my first instinct when they came and escorted me out of my office was I actually thought that they were going to try and get me to testify against the secretary, because the secretary over the whole Signal Gate stuff is under an inspector general investigation. That was my first instinct, was this was part of it.
So there was an investigation into leaking. I think the president, like all presidents, doesn't want leaking. I mean, nobody wants leaking, right? If you're in charge, you don't want your employees to be leaking against you. So there was this leak investigation that was ongoing for weeks, right? What were you? Was your access to classified information limited during that time?
Not at all. In fact, the day I was escorted out of the building, I went into, I won't get specific, the highest of high-level intelligence briefings, and up until the minute I was pulled out of my office, I was on highly classified systems doing my work.
So you were looking at highly classified information up until the moment they brought you outside and separated on the basis of the claim that you were leaking classified information.
I was doing my job. Part of my job entailed looking at intelligence, helping make recommendations to the secretary, giving my thoughts, working with the policy team, and most of our work was done on classified systems.
The reason I'm pressing on this is that doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. So if you're, because just to be clear, you don't want people leaking classified information from the Pentagon.
Let me be clear. That is a problem at the Department of Defense. There has been things that have been shared with the media, particularly I would say the Panama stuff, that is unacceptable. And
I've been the recipient of classified information for decades, including from the Pentagon, in the form of leaks, and every journalist who's doing his job has been. So, like, there's a lot of leaking of classified information, I can tell you.
But let's be honest. Everyone knows where that's coming from. It's from the career staff who don't look like what the president and the secretary and vice president want to do. There's people on the joint staff that I come to respect, but a lot of them are incredibly hostile to the secretary, to the president, and the vice president's worldview. It's pretty obvious that that's where most of the leaks are coming from. There's a less obvious place. I just want to point something out. As we sit here today, Tucker, and this could change by the time this is aired, but as we sit here today, Susan Rice, Michelle Flournoy, Eric Edelman are still in good standing with the Department of Defense.
What?
That is correct. They are still...
Susan Rice? Like
Susan
the Obama
Rice,
Susan Rice?
Yes. Susan Rice is still on the Defense Policy Board.
Right now?
As we sit here today, by the time this is released, that might change. But as we sit here today, she is still on the Defense Policy Board. Now, that doesn't mean she can go in the building and get access to whatever she wants. But it means that she works with DoD employees, she can interact with them, and has the credential and the affiliation with the Department of Defense.
But so Susan Rice has no relevant experience for a job like that at all. She's a political hack.
Correct. Yet, as we sit here in April of 2025, about 100 days into the president's first term, she and a bunch of other people who are incredibly hostile to the president and his worldview remain on the Defense Policy Board.
You're sure?
You can go on the website and check it right now. And I checked with Colin and Darren, and they confirm that as well too.
Well, that's shocking.
And again, I would just say, if you want to look where leaks are maybe coming from, that would be a place to start.
So, but just back to your story, and I won't linger on it. Every time I mention this, your jaw tightens. I can feel your frustration. And I should just say point blank.
Frustrated you.
Well, I'm completely convinced that this is nonsense and sinister nonsense. But if you were the subject of an investigation, a leak investigation, if the investigators had determined that you were leaking classified information to the news media, you probably wouldn't have continued to receive access to classified information, correct?
Correct, and I probably would be sitting here today.
You'd be in jail, dude. You would have been handcuffed, correct?
If I had leaked, well, again, I just want to be clear here. I still don't know if the term they used is, and that you see the DoD using, is unauthorized release of information. If I think there's a lot of rumors and people are exploiting this that we can talk about. If I actually did some of the things that anonymous people on the internet and in the Pentagon are saying I did, I'd be in handcuffs.
And you're not.
I'm not.
Yep.
I'd be like Reality Winner or Bradley Manning or Edward Snowden or one of those people.
It's very obvious to me, having far fewer details than you have, that you're one of the people who is perceived to be standing in the way of a regime change war in Iran, and that was kind of your crime. That seems obvious to me.
I think it's complicated. There's other layers to this, but based on what has been happening since then, I think that is a factor, is that I think, and it is being weaponized against me, is I think that they want to also go after, and I think that I can't say this with certainty, but just speculating, that had somebody in the White House not said, okay, we need to put a stop to this, there probably been more people treated the same way that Colin, Darren Selnick, and myself were treated.
So the fastest way to knock someone out of commission and eliminate his influence, and in your case his job, is to tell the person that he works for that person's betraying you. That person's betraying you. And so, I mean, it sounds to me, again, I'm keep putting words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like you have felt, and it sounds like you still feel, that your views are aligned with those of the president.
100%. I wouldn't have joined this administration if I didn't feel that way. Again, I don't speak for the president, but here's the other thing too. I had this attitude in the Pentagon, and maybe this was, I still had this attitude that I was still, in the Marine Corps. It's like, hey, when a decision is made, when we've decided on a course of action that we're going to do this, we're going to make sure it's executed properly.
Yes.
And you still raise concerns. If you see something happening, then you can do that. But if you are so repulsed by what's happening, then you should resign.
So I think what you're saying is that you were serving your bosses, even when you personally disagreed.
Correct.
As you did in the U.S. Marine Corps.
Correct.
Okay. How does, I don't even want to ask you, but I'm going to, how does this make you, I mean, you must feel like you're living in a dream. A nightmare.
I said earlier, sometimes I feel like it hasn't fully set in because it does feel like a dream. It's like, when am I going to wake up at 04:30 and just get ready for work and, walk my dog, drop her off at doggy daycare, and then roll into the river entrance back into the Pentagon? I feel like on some level that's happening, and it, I feel like it hasn't fully hit me, but it's been awful. I mean, the impact on my family, I'll just say, I wanted to try and hide this from my mom as long as possible because I was worried. She's a worrier. I love her to death. She's a saint. I didn't want to tell her. Then an hour later, somebody leaked to Reuters describing exactly what had happened to me. And then 6 hours later, they pulled the same stunt with Darren, and then 12 hours later, they pulled the same stunt with Colin. And so, it's been devastating, and it's caused a lot of stress to my family. Just one thing I want to say is, I've been a friend and supporter of Pete Hegseth for a long time, and I'm just personally devastated by this. It's just awful and whatnot, but at the end of the day, putting all this aside, Pete Hegseth needs to be a successful Secretary of Defense, and the entire Department of Defense cannot continue to be consumed by chaos. They have a great team there. They have a great Deputy Secretary. We just talked about Steve Feinberg. They have I think, one of the leading lights of the America First foreign policy movement in Bridge Colby, a dear friend of mine, running the policy shop now, effectively the Pentagon's number 3. He has a lot of great mid-level and junior staffers under him. You're going to have some great undersecretaries coming in. These are just world-class people. These are not political hacks. People like Mike Duffy at A&S, people like Emil Michaels and A&S's acquisition and sustainment at research and engineering. Service secretaries, I think, are going to be great. Dan Driscoll, even though he has a secondary job running an agency that shouldn't exist, ATF, I think he's proven to be a great Army secretary. And look, one of my favorite things, Tucker, is admitting you're wrong about people. One person I was wrong about was John Phelan. I was skeptical of him being Navy secretary, and so far I have to say him and his team are off to a great start. I think Troy Mink is going to be a fantastic Air Force secretary, and so there's this fantastic team underneath the secretary that can enable him to be incredibly successful. He has to move past this. He has to get a solid team around him in the front office, and this isn't a plea to hire me back. I candidly just want to move on and go back to doing what I was doing before and being an advocate on the outside. But without Darren and I and others, he needs to get a strong team in there. And there's some great people that I think could do that.
And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
Oh, I have to say, this is interesting you bring him up. Chairman Dan Raisin Kane, incredibly impressive. And I actually think, if I'm being honest, one thing that has incited the building against President Trump and the secretary was the selection of him. A lot of people wanted the secretary and the president to go the normal route, including some people in the administration, and pick a combatant commander, a General Kurilla or an Admiral Paparo. I actually like Admiral Paparo, but they wanted him to go that route. No, instead, they did something that needed to happen, is they pulled a very accomplished guy out of retirement, somebody who didn't do all the right things and check all the right boxes in his career, but who's incredibly smart, who's incredibly thoughtful about how he approaches problems, to be the chairman. And that upset so many career paths. Like, if you look at these books where they kind of lay out like how you promote generals, is they have like little maps about where people are going to go. And there's a lot of people that are going to go to this role in the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the vice chairman. They're going to be the chief of staff of the Army. And by elevating Kane, they upset so many career paths. And it's hard to overstate how much of a middle finger that was to a lot of the uniform leadership of the United States military. And I think that was one of the reasons why we started to see more leaks, really starting around the middle of March.
And they weren't coming from you?
No, absolutely not. And again, it's obvious to anybody who's worked in the Pentagon where these were coming from.
I really appreciate your spending all this time.
Tucker, it's been an honor to be here. And I just want to say, I think you should feel proud because you have played a key role in helping stop some really bad stuff in foreign policy. Your platform has really helped turn the tide, I think, in a lot of different ways, and I think you deserve a lot of credit for that.
I just want to be useful. But I appreciate it. Dan Caldwell, thank you very much, and Godspeed.
Thank you.
So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing this show. On one level, that's not surprising. That's what they do. But on another level, it's shocking. With everything that's going on in the world right now, all the change taking place in our economy and our politics, with the wars we're on the cusp of fighting right now, Google has decided you should have less information rather than more. And that is totally wrong. It's immoral. What can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it. That's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that is true, not intentionally deceptive. The way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe. Hit the little bell icon to be notified when we upload and share this video. That way you'll have a much higher chance of hearing actual news and information. So we hope that you'll do that.
I used to think, if you asked me like even a year ago, I'd be like, well, come on, they're going to roll this guy over in a gurney, get him over the finish line, and I was like, no one would believe that. The whole premise of their democracy, relies on people actually still buying it, and right. I don't know that I don't know that they care anymore, because like when they talk about democracy, it's a soundbite, right? It's not democracy it's not the republic they're preserving.
It's the opposite of what's happening. It's almost like you get kidnapped and the kidnapper has a mask on, but once he shows you his face, he's got to kill you.
Correct.
And they've shown their face.
Yeah, again, I don't think there's anything they wouldn't do. I mean, you put out something, I think it was on Twitter yesterday, which was sort of that extreme. Like, well, if they can't get Trump this way, what's the next level? And I think they've proven that they'll do that in the past. I think we're now figuring that out. We understand it. I think the system's probably been broken for much longer than any of us would care to admit. And for me, I saw it firsthand.
At least 61 years it's been broken since they killed the president in an election year.
Exactly. And for me, even when we started this process, I'd say it's safe to say I was probably the number 2 target of Russia. And I was like, well, there must be something to it. I know I didn't obviously collude with Russia, but maybe I took a selfie with an agent once because I took 10,000 selfies a day, right? So but even like knowing that I was a target, I was like, I still believed because I wanted to, right? I wanted to believe that America is the greatest place in the world, and you can do. And I'm like, it's the FBI. And again, there's some door kickers that I'm still like, hey, they're home team. I get it. They're doing. Eventually, those guys are going to have to speak up, though, right?
We're long past.
I gave the door kickers a pass for far too long, which is like, hey, they can't go against the leadership, but like, when you're watching this kind of bastardization of justice, when you're watching this sort of lopsided level, when they're, they spend more time, kicking down the doors of an Amish farmer selling unpasteurized milk than actually going after people committing terror because, they're trans or, whatever it is that they are, you really lose that ability to get that pass that I really wanted them to give. But I wanted to believe that everything I grew up believing was accurate, and it's all bullshit. It's just all bullshit. So we have to fix that. That's why we fight now, to actually make it so.
But you saw this on January 6th, too. I mean, I know that Joe Scarborough and the rest of the liars presented those people as like insurrectionists and dangerous. They were actually the most pure-hearted and 100%. The most naive about they were literally walking with pocket constitutions saying, no, you can't do this. They believed in the system much more than the people who put them in prison who don't believe in it at all.
Without question. And you saw that. I mean, the narrative was pushed so much. The clips that they used were designed to create something that didn't actually happen. I mean, it's so sick. I always say, it was the first unarmed insurrection in the history of insurrections. I mean, it's never happened before, but arguably, I'd say probably the most heavily armed populace if they wanted to have been, right?
Of course.
But of course it wasn't an insurrection. It didn't matter. And they just wanted to run out the clock.
Like they could hardly believe this was happening. And I think you're describing the same thing. Like you really believed it in our institutions and our norms and democracy.
I did. And it took, again, literally threats of, you're going to jail for treason, a crime punishable by death. That's like not a great swing thought when you're going through it. You know what I mean? I'm like, wait a minute. Like,
if you're the father of 5 kids, that's not.
And yet I still, at the beginning of it, I was like, and then it just, your eyes start to open and you see the games and you see the people that are on your side and you see the Lindsey Grahams of the world, right? They get on TV and they're on, Fox or something like that. And they're like, well, we must subpoena these people and we must get to the bottom of this. I'm like, well, you're like the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Like you have the authority to do that. But you're talking about doing the thing that you have the authority to do, but you're unwilling to actually exercise that power. So that was what disgusted me most about like the Republicans, right? You're telling your base, the people who are watching, like you're fighting. but you know damn well that you're not actually fighting.
No.
Right? And we see that so much. That's the
Such a
difference
betrayal.
between. It's the difference between the Democrats. I mean, they've shown, hey, they'll put their opposition in jail, they'll smother them, they'll silence them. There's nothing they won't do to preserve power. We'll write a strongly worded memo and do nothing to follow up. And I think as long as you have that sort of imbalance in the response, nothing changes. Because the Democrats, they'll take their win, they'll run to the bank, they'll laugh their ass off along the way, and nothing changes until we actually start fighting back.
I think a lot of people yesterday when that verdict came down, I'm among them, my first reaction was, wow, they'll actually hurt us. Like they would execute us, me, I'll just say, speak for myself, and there would be an MSNBC panel of former federal prosecutors telling their audience that I deserved it, and they'd be laughing. And the Lincoln Project would send out a, congratulatory tweet, and I was like, wow, there's sort of a lack of humanity, there's a coldness, there's an evil under all of this that I think I underestimate.
I think we all did. And by the way, I think many still do. Again, it's hard to believe that you could live through these last 8 years or whatever, 10 years, and not think that. I mean, look at, that this is even, within 10 points in terms of an election. Like, I can't name literally a single metric, a single one, geopolitical, economic, or otherwise, like where we're better off now. And yet, they'll outraise us. They'll do this. The media still pushes it as though, Bidenomics is doing wonderfully for you. Like, I get it. I'm the son of a billionaire. If I'm pissed off at the grocery store, like, I'm not like one of these woke guys on one of these channels where it's like, my 3-month-old baby was talking about nuclear proliferation on the Korean Peninsula, Tucker, and she was crying. She was scared. It's like, I get it. Like, I understand where I'm coming from. I'm totally comfortable with that. I've been blessed. But like, if I'm sitting there with sticker shock, like, what's the country feeling? If I see what's going on in my interest rates on my mortgage, like, man, how much longer can we do this? Then you talk about wars and trillions of dollars of spending, and then the Republicans are telling us that, the Ukraine is the number one most important issue for Republicans across our country. I've heard that from Mitch McConnell dozens of times. It's just not, right? I've spoken in front of more Republicans in the last year than Mitch McConnell has in his entire lifetime, and I think I've surveyed, probably I do it live, like just at a speech, 1,000 people here, 500 people here, 5,000 people there. It's been a top 10 issue at about 65,000 people for 3 people. One of them was a DC sort of beltway guy.
Yeah.
He felt very strongly about it. Probably he was profiteering off of it. One of them misunderstood the question, so he thought it was a double negative. So it was not, in fact, a top 10 issue for him. Because is it top 3 or top 10? And one of them, it was top 10, but not top 3. And I said, sir, and I'll ask him. I don't care. I want to hear it out. Like, I'm from Kiev, Ukraine. I was like, I'm going to give you a pass. So I'm going to effectively say, out of about 65,000 people surveyed in the last, let's call it 2 years, 18 months, whatever it is since the war started, a little more, I guess. Basically 0 people have been in favor of this, but the leader of the Senate will tell us it's the number one issue for Republicans across the country. It's just not so.
How can that be? I was in D.C. last night. I never go back. I'm from there. Mm-hmm. And I took 3 people to dinner, 4 people at the table. Nobody drank. For all 3, I am a teetotaler, so are the other 3. Yeah. And it's a good restaurant, but not like a famous restaurant. Yeah. Restaurant I've eaten at for many years. The bill was $800 for 4. $800.
Not drinking.
Not drinking and nothing crazy.
Yeah.
Like salad, steak, dessert. $800. Oh. And I thought, I'm pretty insulated from cost, but I thought, I can't. How do people live here?
My experience was opposite of that. I took 2 of my boys on a fishing trip, and we were coming back, traveling through an airport, and we went to a McDonald's, and it was my 11-year-old boy, my 14-year-old boy, and me at the time. And it was like $47 and change for like an 11-year-old child, a 14-year-old child, and me. I'm like, right. Again, it's not going to change my spending habits. I'm not pretending. I drive it. My truck has 700 horsepower. Like, I'm not happy at the pump, but like.
But if they're telling you the war against Russia is the most important thing to Americans,
yeah, no, it's not.
They're lying. So both of us have sort of skipped ahead past an analysis of the case and sort of taking it as a given that what we saw yesterday was grotesque and really sort of the end of a fair justice system. But for people who've just heard that and not gotten some of the details that prove it to be true, can you just run through what the case was?
I mean, it's literally.
You know too much, I know, but to the extent you can.
How much time we got? But the reality, it's a books and records thing, right? I mean, it's literally a filing. It's like a misfiling, and yet it's something that was never before tried as a felony, like many of the other cases. Like one of the cases in New York where they changed New York state law to be able to, for 1 year. They changed the law for 1 year to be able to go back and change a statute of limitations so that you could go after my father. And then after that year, after that is filed, and they go after my father. That was the Gene Carroll case. It reverts back to the normal statute of limitations because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to do it. This was very similar. This was a case that was, at best, misdemeanor type stuff. Remember, Hillary Clinton started with a similar thing. She got fined $8,000, I believe it was, for starting what was the Russia hoax with the Steele dossier leaks and all of this, right? That was an $8,000 fine. They want to put my father in jail for, upwards of 100 years, depending on how you look at it. And that's never been done before in these things, because basically someone in an accounting department put legal expenses for, paying a lawyer. It's unheard of. But you have experts when they say, well, it's a federal election crime. They wouldn't let the person who wrote the rules, wrote them, is the foremost expert in all of that, actually testify for us. The jury didn't have to be unanimous on the things that they charged. They just all had to sort of come to a general, 4 guys agreed on this and 4 people agreed on that, and 4, that's unanimous. The bastardization of all of this thing, and just having been in the courtroom, candidly, was watching, when the prosecution, objected to something that we said, it was always, sustained. They let them, we couldn't ask anything. When it was us asking the questions, the uncomfortable questions of their witnesses, all of a sudden, we were overruled every time. Just the list goes on.
So you've made the case, and others who followed it carefully have made the case that this was a direct hit from the Biden administration, and 100%. They point to a man called Matthew Colangelo.
Yeah.
Can you tell us who he is?
Yeah, Matthew Colangelo was the number 3 guy in Joe Biden's Justice Department. So from Washington, D.C. The other big part of this case, as it relates to that, was that they're trying to say it's a Federal Election Commission case. Well, name another case that's ever been tried that's a federal crime tried in a state court.
So Matthew Colangelo is number 3 at DOJ. So that's about as high as a prosecutor can ascend.
Correct. Right? And he was moved to New York. Don't forget, Alvin Bragg, the district attorney that actually tried this case, turned it down years ago. They could have done this 7, 8 years ago, whenever it happened, but they didn't. The Federal Election Commission, the FEC, that would have been one of the things that's around it. They could have tried. The IRS could have done these things because if it was a tax thing. All of them chose to pass, including, again, Alvin Bragg, the guy who's trying it and just tried it right now, passed on this a couple years ago. Biden's number 3 at his DOJ comes up, and all of a sudden now they're filing the charges. Conveniently right before an election.
A dumb question. So the number 3 guy at DOJ who's ascended this ladder,
yes.
Okay, what is he doing in New York? I mean, that's a massive step down.
What is he doing? He's prosecuting his political enemies, Tucker.
Okay, but that's it. But nobody...
there's literally no other explanation for it. When you look at the bastardization of this, you have a judge who's a Biden donor. His daughter is one of the number 1 Democrat fundraisers.
When you say he's a Biden donor, he's literally a Biden donor.
He's a Biden donor, literally has written checks himself. His daughter is one of the most prolific fundraisers for the radical Democrats, Adam Schiff and she's made millions off of that. This judge allowed his daughter's clients, Democrat mega donors, to sit in the courtroom. It's like having front row seats, like you own the New York Rangers, right? It's think of how insane that is, right?
But can I ask a dumb question? First of all, why would the number 3 guy at DOJ wind up in a state case? That seems like he must have been sent. 1. 2, if the judge was literally a Biden donor and donating to, among other things, like the Stop Trump effort, which I think was one of them, how could he remain the judge? How could he?
Because it's New York. What do you appeal it to? You appeal it to another panel of radicals, right? I mean, it was like the New York AG case, right? We got fined almost $500 million for paying back a bank on time with interest. The bank, who's the alleged victim, is on the stand being like, no, we love Trump. We want to do more business with Trump, not less. Having their portfolio was a feather in our cap that we used to generate other business. Doesn't matter. You're a victim. It's pure and simple political persecution. They're going after, there's nothing that they won't do to stop Trump. And they understand now, with years of experience in the White House, I think, going in as a novice was great in many ways, but you also don't know who the snakes are. You don't know who the people who are going to actually help you and be sort of loyal to the cause. And that cause is, being the duly elected president of the United States, doing the things you said you would do versus doing what the swamp wants, slow rolling what the president wants, all those unelected officials. And so I think the notion of Trump coming back now actually scares them so much more because he has that knowledge, he has that understanding, and I think that will make him so much more effective in a second term.
Well, and also, if you're going to kill the king, you better kill the king.
Yeah, you best not miss, as the saying goes.
That's
right?
exactly right. So are you worried? Well, a couple questions.
No.
Will this stop the campaign? What effect is this going to have?
Listen, I spoke to my father, right after the verdict, today. I mean, obviously, it's a somber moment. I mean, and, you know me well enough. I can pretty much, fight through anything, and we keep going, and he will too. But it is a somber moment, more so for our country. So, but if anything, I would say it's actually strengthened his resolve. I think in 2016, it was the elevator ride right before the infamous escalator ride. Now we find out who our real friends are. He knew what was going to happen. He knew the celebrities would go, but he knew that, and he did it anyway. I think after 2020, he understood that if he just went home, he could go play golf and go back to building buildings and making millions and getting paid to give speeches and stuff like that. There's just too much at stake. And so he's just unwilling to stop.
I got to think a lot of people are looking back to 4 years ago and reaching the conclusion, well, if they'll rig a trial, they'll probably rig an election.
I think without question. I think, the reality is, what I see, on the ground, the amount of people from the the demographics that probably have never voted Republican before, that are just, grabbing me at airports or like even walking down the streets, in New York the other day. It's amazing. I mean, I did for example, I was one of the probably most out there people in terms of rallies and campaigns, doing my own thing in 16 and 20. I think, just for example, October of 2020, I think I did 104 rallies in that month. So like 4 a day for a month straight. Like I'm on the ground. The energy in 2020 was better than even 16, amazingly enough, but they had that ability to weaponize COVID and all of that stuff. We saw the nonsense. It's so much stronger right now, and we're still 6 months out. That doesn't mean they won't do, again, I don't even pretend to think that, hey, it's going to be fair and they're not going to cheat and they're not. I used to probably think that, hey, there's only so far they can go. Like how they're going to roll this guy over the line in a gurney and, pretend he's, because I used to think they actually had maybe a little bit of shame, but that's not actually at all true. I don't think they care anymore. They're laughing at, when they use democracy, it's a soundbite.
But they're never
laugh
punished.
about at their cocktail
They're never
parties.
punished. They weren't punished for the Iraq War
Correct.
or the Afghanistan withdrawal or the lies around COVID, the vaccine mandates. They weren't punished for the 2020 election.
Russia. I mean,
Russia
not only
bullshit.
are they not punished, Tucker, they're given better jobs. They either keep their job and then they get a CNN contributorship to talk about preserving democracy.
But maybe, if you treated your kids this way, they'd be sociopaths.
I think
allowed
they
them,
are.
Yeah, well, they certainly are.
They are.
I'm sure they had boomer parents who indulged them, of course. But someone needs to be punished at some point, right? So it stops.
I think without question. I don't think, we have not done that well, Republicans, right? The Democrats don't fear us because they know we'd never play the same game because we actually believe what they think is a soundbite. We actually believe those things. And it's actually hard. It's hard for me to say those things because I'd love not to have to play that game, but I don't believe there's another answer other than we have to fight fire with fire. As long as we're playing T-ball while they're playing fast pitch hardball, they're going to win. They're going to take their power. They're going to run to the bank. They're going to and laugh every step of the way. There's just not enough actual fighters there. When you look at look at the Republican bench, it's not very deep.
No.
In terms of the guys that you'd actually, hey, who's a guy I want in a foxhole? Who's a guy that'll actually fight? Who's a guy that's not going to succumb to the pressures of Washington D.C.?
Who are they?
Right now, I love a guy like a J.D. Vance.
I do too.
There are a couple, but man, that list is who's next.
Mike Lee is kind of becoming that guy.
Yeah, Mike Lee's a fighter. I like Mike, and it's interesting. It's one of those. In 2016, Mike Lee and I almost got in a fist fight on the convention floor. We were very different, but he's a guy that I text with probably daily.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that once you actually have that relationship, you can actually people come around. It's like, okay, you were actually right.
Well, people change on the basis of evidence and what they
Correct.
see. My views are totally different from what they were 10 years ago.
I think the problem with DC is for conservatives, it's actually an easy existence. You can be a Republican in DC as long as you're Republican light.
Of course.
If you're hey, say whatever you want when you're speaking to a group of 10 people in your little hometown. You can come to DC, you can vote with the Republicans 80% of the time.
Yeah.
When it actually matters, as long as you vote with us, the Washington Post isn't going to come after you. They're not going to be protesting in front of your home. It's an easy existence. You'll get invited to the cool person Christmas party and holiday party. I don't want to they don't celebrate Christmas because because they don't believe in God, right? The Democrats, their gods are evolving, right? Because Greta Thunberg is the high priestess of climate change. Fauci is the lord of
science.
Science and COVID. And these days it's Vladimir Zelensky, the high priest of Ukraine, which is apparently the number one issue for Republicans across the country. But I've not yet seen that anywhere. It's but those are the people they choose to be their deities, and everything follows that path until they burn out, flame out, or get exposed for what they really are.
How can you run a presidential campaign when you're fighting multiple legal battles, criminal battles?
Well, that's by design, right?
Of course.
You look at all of these things. They understand. Listen, Joe Biden in a basement is good for Joe Biden's campaign, because if you put him on a stage, it's a negative, right? He's incapable of getting through a teleprompter. He would get lost at this table.
Yes.
I don't say that as glibly. It's just
it's sad.
It's sad. I feel bad. He can't get through basic things, and yet he's the leader of the free world, or whoever's pulling the marionette strings. Trump locked in a courtroom for 5 weeks while he should be campaigning. That's really good for them because he can bring that message to people. People understand what he's saying. It resonates with them. He's able to bring people over who would not have otherwise been able to or would have ever voted Republican. He's one of the few guys that can do that, sort of expose the left for what it is, expose what we're talking about, break through the noise put out there by the mainstream media, break through the noise and sort of the manipulation of big tech. Those are those are trillion-dollar industries that are functioning as the marketing department for today's Democrat Party. And to be able to single-handedly sort of break some of those walls down. I mean, if I felt like if I was in charge of that, if I was in charge of the Democrat side, we'd be winning elections 99.9 to 0.01,
Exactly.
And yet they're still close. I think our messaging is there, and I think it's really important. Perhaps, honestly, the stuff that they've done to my father, our family, perhaps it's the most important thing to happen to America in recent history, in that it's exposed just how bad it is.
I think
you
it's
can't
exactly
hide from it anymore. It's not like, I get it. Like, you come home from a long day of work, you're trying to feed your family, you're listening to 5 minutes of, Brian Stelter on TV. It's like, well, there's got to be something to it. During the early campaign stuff, if I watch TV to hear about myself, I'm like, man, I hate me too. Yeah. It's so bad. People feel it every day. They're not going for it anymore, and I think it's why they're watching you here or me on Rumble or whatever it may be. They're going to other places to hear an alternate viewpoint because the machine just isn't delivering anymore, and it's so unreal.
But the machine knows that, and the machine exists to perpetuate itself. That's the only point, is to maintain power. Mm-hmm. These are incompetent people with no other prospects in life other than running the machine. So,
not all of them are incompetent. When I see what tech is doing,
machine running.
Yeah. When I see what tech is doing, though, you even see it now, because I see the algorithm. It's like, it'll show me just enough of what I want to see, but never promote anything else. On my Meta platforms, I haven't grown in 3 years, and yet everyone that comes up to me, hey, you got the greatest Instagram I've ever seen. So the people who are already following me will see my stuff, so it appears. It's almost like it's AI designed to let you think you're not being censored, or that you're able to see the stuff that you want.
Oh, I'm aware.
But they're preventing that growth. You're well aware of that. So
yes.
The evolution of that is making it hard. In 16, 17, 18, when I was starting to get censored by, let's call it Twitter 1.0, they're like, well, how do you know you're being censored? I was like, well, because yesterday I got 7,500 retweets on a post. Today I got 3. And it's, I do my own social. When I hit that button, I know what it's going to do. I know when it's, okay, that's a decent post. I know, that's hot. That's going to go big. And it's like when it goes big for about 30 seconds, and then it's like, just, you see exactly what they're doing, but they're coming up with better ways to make it appear as though they're not censoring, while still, continuing to perpetuate and push, the ideals that they espouse and value.
No one interfered in the last election more than Mark Zuckerberg.
Or Google.
Or Sergey Brin. That's exactly right. So, but let me ask you, the convictions come down 34 yesterday, and your father goes out there and just basically raises the middle finger and says, we're going to win anyway. And within hours, Benny Thompson of Mississippi, who's a monster, Democratic congressman, introduces legislation to pull his Secret Service. Yeah. So basically they're saying, okay, we'll kill you now.
Well, they did that a while ago also. If he goes to prison, we want to pull his Secret Service. So basically, if we put him in a cell, we're going to put him in a place where he could be murdered.
But that's a death threat.
Of course it is. But
from a member of Congress.
Again, should it surprise us? I mean, you look at half the congressmen, get in their faces, make them feel it. I mean, they can say these things, and they are lauded as heroes. If we said something even remotely like that, we're literally inciting violence. I mean, those words are violence, Tucker. We've seen this. The double standard that's out there. I mean,
But how hard is it for you
Congresswoman after Congresswoman, you have a Hamas caucus, in Congress calling for, the death of people in the Middle East. It's, well, that's okay. You can't do that. If we did something similar, we'd be blocked. We'd be off of every platform. We'd be canceled. And, again, different games. We're playing 2 very, very different games.
But that's so threatening. Tony Fauci he doesn't even work for the government. He's got Secret Service protection. He walks in the dog park in Washington, D.C. I happen to know for a fact because it's my dog park, former dog park. And he's got, 3 guys following him, but they want to pull it from your dad.
Yeah. Well, look at what they did with some of the justices, the Supreme Court justices, right? I mean, you think that they'd be able to do what they've done to Alito even this week. We're going to make him recuse himself because his wife hung a flag upside down. I was like, well, she can't express an opinion. What they've tried to do to Clarence Thomas, what they did as it relates to Gorsuch and others, it's insanity. If they did that to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, if they were picketing in front of their house like they did Amy Coney Barrett, that would be a serious problem. Those people would go to jail.
Of course.
But, we'll let if that's the conservative justice, we'll let them suffer a little bit. We'll make sure but it's effective. Because then you see some of them, and some of them are a little weaker than, perhaps their principles. And, they're, it's a little bit of, maybe I got to go a little light on this one because it's not worth the headache. I mean,
when the Democratic Party's militia shows up outside your house, it's happened to me.
Yeah.
People are intimidated by that.
Of course, and we see it, across the board. It's designed, the Hunter Biden laptop, that's Russian disinformation. Here's 52 intelligence officers signing off on it. Oh, it must be. 4 years later, oh no, it's actually his laptop. There's no accountability for that either. But they're like, well, no, we're admitting it now. It's like, no, but you got exactly what you wanted at the time. We understand there's no accountability for it. That's election interference as much as anything else. Also, there was the stat, I think it was 17% of people said had they known about the Hunter Biden laptop, it would have changed their vote in 2020. 17%. That's a lot of votes. And yet, that was the gospel. And if you said anything about it, we've had the conversation about, Wuhan lab leak theory. No, of course it didn't come from the lab that studies the virus in question that we fund. It came from the wet market 3 feet outside of the lab. And if you believe otherwise, we're going to pull your funding. If you're a doctor, you'll lose tenure if you're at a university. You won't, Fauci's going to not sign off on your grants anymore. And even if you're like, but you don't have to be a scientist. They're like, Don, how would you know? You're not a virologist. It's like, you don't have to be a virologist to know that it happened there. You just have to not be an imbecile. Like, you can have like mid, double-digit IQ and be like, of course it came from the place that studies the exact virus in question that was at ground zero of where it released, and not from 4 feet outside of that. It's insane. And yet, think of the truly intelligent people in positions of power in medicine and otherwise who went along with this blindly because, it was easier to do, and, there was a lot of money, and, it's not
kind of hard to do that now, though. I mean, everything that's happened.
This isn't all that long ago. I mean,
right. But I do think at this point, if you're still telling yourself those lies, you are lying to yourself. You are a liar.
But it doesn't matter. They correct it years later, but they got what they needed out of the ruse.
Right.
Right? They got what they needed. And again, because there's no accountability after the fact, it doesn't matter. They'll do it again. And they'll make it the gospel for 6 months, or, I always said, the difference between the truth and a conspiracy theory is 6 months.
Yeah.
Now it's like 6 minutes, but they'll still get what they want out of that 6 minutes, use it to manipulate whatever they need to. And, I don't see that stopping. I see more people being awake to it, right? That 6 months moved to 6 minutes because people are not just blindly buying the BS anymore.
So how does it play out from here over the next 5 months? I mean, they tried to put him in prison. They're still. Do you think he?
So we got to overwhelm the margin of fraud.
So it's just to ask. It's July 11th is sentencing.
July 11th. So by the way, you think that's a coincidence? That's 4 days before the Republican National Convention. Do you think that's a coincidental timing, or do you think that's designed to throw a wrench into that? I mean, yet another coincidence, right?
But what happens if can they remand him and put him in jail then?
I imagine they will try. Right? I mean,
why wouldn't they?
Yeah, of course. Like, does anyone think? And again,
that's too far.
That's too far. It's nothing's too far. And again, until it happens, we have to stop giving them the benefit of the doubt, thinking they're going to act above board. This is an arm's length transaction. No, it's not. Like, what are you talking about? There's not a single aspect of this case that should stand in any court. But where do you appeal right now? To the New York Appellate Division, which is just as radical? And it's not just this case. Look at all the shade, all the craziness around Fani Willis. Right, that case. You look at Jack Smith and the FBI doctoring documents and setting up staging photos and then leaking it to the Washington Post. The classified documents that end up on the front page of the Washington Post. That's fine. Each one of these things wouldn't stand. If we did this to, meaning conservatives, some sort of Republican did this to Obama, it would never end. It would be a perpetual story, and rightfully so. And yet, hey, as long as it's against a conservative, as long as it's against Trump, who's up against that machine, we're going to allow these things to happen. It's not like one of these things doesn't have any serious hair on it, right? They're all shady as hell, and yet it doesn't matter. And our mainstream media almost refuses to cover it. They won't talk about these things. My father, in many cases, is gagged. I mean, think about that. I mean, First Amendment is kind of the First Amendment, right? It's a big one for us. The former president of the United States is not allowed to talk about the facts of the case because, if people actually heard that from him, they'd realize just how much, BS is in all of these things. That should trouble a lot of people. You think it stops with Trump? Think about that. I mean, if they can do it to arguably one of the most, out there, most powerful people in the world, a bank account to be able to fight, a base to push it, venues to be a soapbox to speak from, if they can do it to him, who can't they do it to? But more importantly, if they will so flagrantly and so corruptly do it to him, who won't they do it to? That's the question we have to be asking. I mean, is anyone safe? And it's like COVID. People going blindly along. No, it's going to be different this time. I'm like, really? Like that's what you've got out of this?
But
last
if they
8 years?
put the Republican candidate who was leading in the polls, all things equal, he becomes president again in November. If they put him in jail right before the Republican convention on fake charges stemming from a rigged trial, they're kind of pushing violence, aren't they?
Listen,
how do they expect people to respond to that? Nothing like that has ever happened.
In the reality, you have to be careful even how you talk about that.
No,
right?
they are pushing violence.
They
want
clearly
violence.
are. But again, nothing should surprise us, right? The star witness of this case is someone who lied before every branch of Congress, was disbarred, lied to banks, lied to wives, lied to the press. But we're expected to believe that he actually told the truth in this one instance, right? That's who they hang their hat on because it doesn't matter. When it's rigged the way it is,
freaks me out.
It doesn't matter.
We're moving toward something ugly, and I don't want that.
No one does. But they're not going to let it play out. I mean, do you think they'll ever take their foot off the gas? Like, no, it's not. They've gotten away with it for years.
How should people respond, do you think?
I think, honestly, the reality is everyone has to get involved.
Yeah.
And again, it's both sides. I mean, you have to have, people, running for office. And I'm not talking about president or Congress, or run for your school boards. I mean, that's perhaps the thing that's most important to me. Frankly, there's a component of me that I don't want to win the presidency if we don't have Congress and the Senate, because I'll probably be up on charges again, and we'll get to go through impeachment, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and, for the next 4 years. I don't think that's a great place to be, but I think, apathy has caused us a lot of problems, especially on the conservative side. Hey, we run businesses and we do these sorts of things, and we want to spend time with our families, and all noble things and important, but we have to take the initiative to get involved at every level of these things, because the left has taken over every major institution in our country that controls. I mean, what they've done in education, manipulating our children, what they've done in entertainment, oftentimes the same thing. It can't stand if we actually want to have a future. Our kids, they graduate out, there's high schools with higher districts, no one can read or do math, but, they know the 4,376 genders. And I imagine since this interview started, there's probably another 15 that I haven't included that, so I don't want to be labeled as, whatever, a gender bigot by not including them, but that's the last I've been able to keep track of. We just live in perilous times.
It does seem kind of heartening. I think he raised more money in the hours after the verdict than anyone's ever raised. How much he raised?
It's over, I think, $38 million that, in the first couple hours. Small dollar donors, and then there was a bunch of big dollar donor stuff. That's what's interesting. I mean, there are tech VC guys, respected guys, that, Hillary donors and even probably Biden donors. They're like, okay, I've seen enough. Stroking, 6- and 7-figure checks now, because, I think people who are watching closely enough truly understand just how far we have fallen, just how close we are perhaps to that fulcrum point where there's a point of no return, right?
Yes.
And I think if we ever let it get there, there's no question in my mind that the Democrat elite, they'd maintain and seize that power, and it'll happen like all sort of communist nations, and that's where we're at. And I think people see that, and people who may not even agree with Trump on everything, and you don't have to agree with Trump on anything. I obviously agree with him on everything, Tucker. as the dutiful son, but
it's reached a level of principle, though.
Yeah, but it's like, again, name a metric where we're better off under Joe Biden. We're on the brink of World War III with the world's largest nuclear superpower by volume of nuclear capable ballistic missiles. I don't know. We're going to keep funding that. We're okaying a guy that was a former weirdo actor to send the U.S. made missiles into Russia, provoking that, I guess. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's the next distraction, right? COVID was the distraction for 2020 to allow them to manipulate things. Maybe World War III is the distraction, for this election
Some
cycle.
of us called this a year ago.
Yeah,
the senile man can't win. They're going to bring us to war. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I don't say that lightly, but I also don't say it I don't know. Would I be at all surprised? Not even. I think it's lunacy. I think it's crazy, but do I think they would do it? 100%. 100%.
Do you think, last question, but it's just, and I might be skipping ahead, but I don't think we're far from, we're at war with Russia.
Oh, of course.
If we're targeting...
That whistleblower talking about the boots on the ground, I mean, I've never seen a whistleblower disappear that fast in my life.
Yeah, you wonder
why. I wonder why, huh? It's almost like it's happening.
But they would need, the military's in very tough shape, and recruitment is way down. No one wants to join the training military, understandably. Now they're talking about, well, who would, right?
Well, who's going to... The guys you'd want fighting a war for you, good, patriotic, red-blooded Americans, they don't want to go report to Trans Admiral, not because if the Trans Admiral was Patton, maybe they'd do it.
Yeah.
The Trans Admiral ain't Patton.
No.
Okay. The Trans Admiral is only an admiral because they're trans, not because they're competent or capable, and it doesn't matter.
It's grotesque.
But a big part of signing up for that and possibly dying for your country is actually believing in the things that you're fighting for. That's the basics of patriotism.
That's exactly.
And if you don't believe in those things and you understand that you're going to be vilified, you're going to be forced to not learn how to shoot but do diversity training, why on earth would you do that? I wouldn't. And
that's the problem they're facing. And so, the one solution was take illegal aliens and put them in the military, so we could have
or flood our borders and put them in the voting roster, and that's another way to make up power because you've lost other demographics that were reliable voters.
But they're also talking about the draft. You're hearing that all of a sudden. Well, maybe we need a draft.
Yeah, so we can be in never-ending wars. Again, what no one's articulated to me, and I kind of do this now. Feels like for a living. No one's articulated what does victory in Ukraine look like. I don't know what it means.
I don't know.
Is it just perpetual death of Ukrainians and Russians until they're all wiped out and BlackRock comes in there and takes over all the farmland? I mean, is that what it is? Because feels like that's what it is to me.
They're already selling off land
they
in
are.
Ukraine to foreign investors, and they will flood Ukraine with third world immigrants, and Ukraine will not exist in 50 years. There'll be no Ukrainian nation. And we betrayed them like no other country ever. But I just ask you, would people actually serve in a draft?
I'd have a hard time. I mean, honestly, the metric I use for this is not just the recruitment numbers, but the amount of guys that I know. I shoot a lot and whatever. The circles are tight. Like that are like fourth generation Army. They're like, I would beat the crap out of my son if he decided to. Like these are guys that their entire ethos is around that military background. They are great friends, and they're like,
I know.
They wouldn't even think about it. They disown their children if they joined this military today, and that's sad.
It's the worst thing
that's
I can
scary.
imagine. Well, Godspeed. Thank you for that.
Thank you, man.